Next speaker is Lindsay MacDonald from University of Calgary, and she's going to talk about the unexpected in installations. So we'll see where that leads us.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lindsay MacDonald from the University of Calgary. I'm a PhD student, and I am working with some very talented people. But first of all, let me tell you about how we designed the unexpected. We made endlessly fascinating interaction for interactive installations. So I collaborate with, here we go. I collaborate with John Brosz, Miguel Nacenta, and Sheelagh Carpendale. And they're also my co-authors. And this is what I'd like to tell you about today. We achieved endlessly fascinating interaction in an interactive installation. And yes, to be clear, I did just say endlessly fascinating interaction. So to briefly explain to you what endlessly fascinating interaction is, it's a lot easier for me to just call it EFI. And by EFI, I mean that I wanted to create an experience that was different every time it was encountered by making a constantly changing interactive narrative. So we think that these conditions must be present in an interactive installation in order for it to be endlessly fascinating. First, it must be interesting at any given time. Second, the content shouldn't be too repetitive. Third, it should present the viewer with possible storylines. So here is some of our inspirations for our interactive art installations, or some things that we find fascinating. These installations in particular inspired us because they can all be said to have some degree of EFI. First of all, this is the classic Myron Kroger's Video Place, set up an actively dynamic and playful experience that attracted viewers and encouraged them to explore how their actions would trigger response in the work. Second, Gary Hill's Tall Ships engaged viewers' interest by having them exchange intense gaze with projected ghosts on the walls of a corridor. So here, when a viewer or visitor stands on a sensor in front of the wall, the ghost will approach the viewer and stay a while in front of them, and then they leave. The ghost leaves when the viewer steps off of the sensor. And gaze here, the gaze, functions as a means of getting viewers to relate to the ghost's sense of longing with experiences in their own lives, creating the illusion of an emotional bonding experience. So lastly, this is Chameleon by Tina Gonsalves. And this installation sustains viewers' interest by reading their facial expressions and having the projected faces reflect them back like an emotional contagion. Another thing that we find really fascinating is liminal spaces. Broadly speaking, liminal space is an in-between space. It's neither here nor there, and it's kind of like, I guess a good example of this would be a doorway or a hallway, or possibly an elevator. And liminal space can force us to adopt behavior that we see as being socially acceptable in order to avoid being uncomfortable. For example, in an elevator, we resort to all kinds of things to deal with being in a confined space with a stranger. Gaze is really powerful here, and dealing with the gaze of a stranger is especially uncomfortable in a space like this. So this experience is exactly what we hope to harness. And we built something a little bit unexpected in an elevator lobby. So the elevator here on the left is a little bit different from the others, you may notice, and this is our site-specific installation that uses endlessly fascinating interaction. And it's called A Delicate Agreement. So this is a false elevator with peepholes in the doors, and you're probably sitting there wondering, why in the world would you do that? So I was inspired by this old elevator we have at the University of Calgary that has portholes in the doors, and you can kind of see when the elevator comes down, and you can see the people inside. And I kind of combined this with this weird thing that I saw on an elevator door, and I thought it was a peephole that was maybe 8 foot up off the ground, but actually I found out it's not. It's if you're wondering, it's a keyhole in case somebody gets stuck in the elevator. I didn't know that, but now I do. So that kind of played out as looking like this. So we wanted the viewer to not need to discover difficult actions to trigger a response from our piece, so we made use of incidental and passive interaction. Viewers can affect the unfolding story in this installation with their gaze simply by looking through the peepholes in the doors. And the reason for this is because behind each door, we have a custom-made lo-fi gaze tracker made from a modified webcam and a hot mirror. The details about the tracker are in the paper, so you guys can check it out there. But basically, it kind of sits behind the peephole like this. Here's Miguel with a prototype of our tracker showing how it sits behind the door. And our software is based on the ITU gaze tracker from Denmark. And this is roughly what the viewer would see when a viewer looks in, or what the computer sees, sorry. We can determine the basic direction of the viewer's gaze this way. So this is kind of an action shot. And this is what the viewer would see when they look in. Physically, the structure of the elevator is modular so that it's pretty easy to move around, relatively speaking. We can fit it into the back of an SUV in a few trips. We placed an LCD monitor behind each peephole to display stop-motion animations of the people in the elevator riding together. And there's a detail shot here. Basically, you can't even see the gaze tracker at all. And my favorite part is that two viewers can interact at the same time. So on these LCD screens behind the peepholes, we have a stop-motion animation of up to 2 people riding the elevator together, and we call these people characters. And these photos were shot in a theatrical set that I built in a photo studio. It's being composited in real time, dropping images into the left and right halves of the screen separately to complete the setting of the interior of the elevator. And the characters react to what the other person in the elevator and also what the viewer is doing. So just as in a real elevator, if a viewer stares at one of the characters' faces, the character is going to acknowledge and react to the viewer, and each of them does this a little bit differently. I get the feeling you guys might know some of these people. I don't know. So we have 16 characters who could show up in the elevator at any given time, and the actors were a coalition of the willing, shall we say. Each character has around 1,000 to 2,000 photos, and these are all sorted into sequences that represent a behavior, so an emotion or a reaction. A character can have up to 25 different behaviors. So as you can imagine, this presents an incredibly large number of combinatory possibilities. Right, it's really big. This is where we get into the territory of being endlessly fascinating. So in order to make this system work, we use a complex adaptive system, or CAS. This is a talk full of acronyms. So let me really briefly explain to you guys what a CAS is, in case you don't know. So it's a system, and it's complex, and it's also adaptive, okay? I promise you there's a better explanation in the paper. So basically, it's a system that's got individual entities or agents that are only locally aware of what's going on around them. And they're neither fully constrained, and they're not chaotic. So that is, there's pretty considerable freedom allowed to them, but there's still rules. And this results in some emergent behavior between the agents. So an example of this would be like an economy, and individuals or household that operate within this economy. Or maybe an immune system. But in our case, our agents are our characters, and there's 16 of them, and they each have their own set of rules or personalities. And this is set up kind of like this. Hopefully you can kind of see what's going on here. These are coordinate spaces with regions that define the character behaviors, and we refer to these as maps. So for more complex characters, there are more areas on these behavior maps, more rectangles. And for simpler characters, there's fewer behavior areas on this. So the axes of these coordinate spaces are based on an idea from Clifford Nass that a personality can be defined by 2 meaningful dimensions, and that's extroversion and agreeableness. And ours are desire for attention and aggressiveness here. So each of the numbers on this map here corresponds to a behavior. For example, anger, boredom, being neutral, or being aggressive. And then also we have three behaviors that aren't mapped here. That's acknowledging the viewer, getting on the elevator, and getting off the elevator. So characters only have a subset of these behaviors available to them, and when they're alone in the elevator and have no other characters to interact with, they just don't do as much stuff. Like, they won't be aggressive towards a person who's not there. It doesn't look right. So viewers, however, can still interact with characters and influence their behavior when they're alone. So a character can only be in one place at a time on his or her map, and as they move around the map and spend more time in the elevator, they tend to, I guess there's that, the green circle there kind of represents their position right now. Right, okay, next. We base the rules of our cast on part of Goffman's theory of the performance of self. So basically this means that when I interact with another person, I'm going to form my opinion about how I'm going to react to them based on similar experience I've already had with them. So when they express something to me, I'm going to take that information and combine it with what I know about them to form an expression back to them. And then there's kind of this cycle of back and forth, impression and expression that goes on. So this enabled us to create convincing approximations of reactions between our characters. And this is our equation. So keep in mind that each of these letters is a tuple or a tuple if you're from the US or the UK, quadruple, I don't know. Anyway, the full details of this are in the paper, but I'll briefly explain how this works. So this is the character's next behavior that they're going to act out, so the location on their map in X and Y. This is a result of their current location on the map, so X and Y here, S, and then plus the impression vector that the character has times the expression vector that they're getting from the other character, and the constant value C, which makes each character move to a particular part of the map depending on who they are that they prefer to be in, and this makes for slight variations in behavior when the character is alone in the elevator. And more reactive characters will have a higher value for I, and less reactive characters will have a lower value. All right, visually it looks like this. So this is kind of how this plays out. Let's, for example, take our character of Phyllis. She's the elderly woman. And here's her personality map on the right here. And right now she is feeling neutral. Here's Leo. We'll call him Leo. He's feeling angry, and she's neutral. Leo's actions here are going to trigger a reaction in Phyllis. So Phyllis's reaction, in turn, is going to determine Leo's subsequent behavior. So right now, Phyllis is trying to defend herself, and Leo is actually going to just lose interest. So here they are in their new behavior states. So let's make this even more interesting. Let's throw in some viewers. So we basically take the values from the gaze trackers and throw these into the equation, and they affect the behavior. So we basically track the top left and right of the frame that the viewer is staring at, and bottom left and right, and then add that in. And if the viewer is staring at a character's head, it's going to make the character acknowledge them first and then react. So let's try this out. We stare at Leo's head. First of all, he's going to acknowledge us, and then he's going to shift his behavior, in this case, to being obnoxious. So since we have a cast, of course, we're going to have some emergent behaviors that pop up after a while. And we definitely noticed that after we implemented this in our elevator, we were noticing a few emergent behaviors as the characters interacted with each other. First of all, everyone is bisexual. And this is because we didn't actually code in any sort of sexual preferences for anyone. So when they're attracted, they're attracted. It just happens. And I don't feel like I have the right to judge them or impose this on them, so that's fine. The second thing that happened was really unexpected, and this is after I left it running in the lab for about 5 months. I noticed when I looked in the door that everybody was scared all the time.
And that's because the one character who has the most aggressive personality created an atmosphere of fear that spread through the entire ecosystem of our piece, even when he wasn't even there in the elevator. So we had an exhibition at another gallery, and the curator asked me to introduce 8 new characters, and I had to fix the problem of Leo. So what I decided to do was introduce an authority character in order to go against the rule of, keep with the rule of not being repetitive for endlessly fascinating interaction. So things worked themselves out. Leo started behaving himself, and there was peace in the elevator. So this is an example of how flexible and responsive storylines can emerge as a result of endlessly fascinating interaction. But actually, there was one drawback. We did have a bad emergent behavior. So when we introduced the extra 8 characters for this new show, the absence of fear of the gangster character allowed a new behavior to emerge that we were not so okay with. And this was that people were starting to flirt with our little girl character. So this highlights the need to test things thoroughly before you show them. So I had to do the not-so-okay thing of going into her personality code and fixing it so she just didn't interest people as much anymore. It is what it is. Anyways, so how do we know it was endlessly fascinating, you're probably wondering? Well, we didn't do a formal study. We did exhibit this work 3 times, and 2 of which we were invited by curators. And from what we've observed and what gallery attendants have told us, and what the librarians at the U of C have told us, because it was set up across from their station, signing books out to people, people spend much longer than the typical 3 seconds that we would see in museums engaged with the work, and they come back many times, and they bring their friends with them, and sometimes there's even a line to interact with it. And people have come back to me and shared anecdotes about what they saw the characters doing, what their theories about their relationships are. And this, for example, is a theory that some people have, that these 2 characters here are secretly in love with each other, even though they have never met. And this is another example of how stories can emerge. So summing up, we've created an installation that was designed to provide endlessly fascinating interaction. We've shown how we used a liminal setting of continued awkwardness in an elevator to intensify the storylines. And we've shown how a cast can be used to make a non-repetitive storyline. And we've shown how we've used Goffman's performance theory to create rules for a cast that can offer convincing approximations of behavior. And through these, we have endlessly fascinating interaction that could be interesting at any time, isn't repetitive, and has emerging storylines. And that is how we achieved endlessly fascinating interaction in an interactive art installation. So my talk is not endless, but I hope it was fascinating, and I would like you to interact with me now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that was really fun. Do we have any questions?
Phil Feldman, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I used to work in artificial life. This is just right up my alley.
Oh, thank you.
I have really 2 questions. One is just theatrical. Mm-hmm. How did you decide what the expressed states of the actors were? You know, you have this map. You have to have this list of things that they have to do. And how did you decide?
How did I get them to do it?
Not how did you know that they were expressing what you wanted people to perceive?
Well, I kind of left that up to them. So like I said, I had thousands and thousands of pictures. So I would tell my actor, like, I want you to pretend to be getting angry right now. And I would usually shoot the 2 characters together so they had someone to interact with. And sometimes they didn't do exactly what I wanted, but I would go through the pictures and end up just putting stuff together to make an approximation of what I thought it should look like. So it was kind of creative license. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the follow-up question is, so you have a vector that's moving through this decision space.
Yes.
Does it have inertia?
You would have to ask my collaborator, John, about that. He's the expert, but I believe it does. Okay. I couldn't tell you very much more than that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. It's beautiful work.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else? or we'll switch to our next speaker. So can we give a hand for that? That was endlessly entertaining.